Tony, the floor is yours.
All right. Nice to meet everybody. Well, I guess I'll start off with, I started in fire in 1988. So I'm aging myself a little bit there, but I think this next coming season will be, I think, about 35 years in wildfire. Again, I started in 1988 with the Forest Service. I started on a small little hand crew, 6-person, hand crew right out of high school. Looking to do something exciting, looking to be in the woods. Didn't want to be confined in those days, to the asphalt jungle, if you will. I wanted to be outside. So on that 6-person crew for a couple of years, and then I was promoted. I did some crew boss on a Type 2 IA crew. And then I did that for a few years. And then in 1996, I applied and I was accepted to the Boise Smoke Jumpers. I did that for about 6 years. Family started coming around. And so falling out of planes, I figured I better do something a little more responsible. And so that's when I really started to take off in my career in prescribed fire. So I applied and I got a fuels technician job for a couple of years. So I had a really solid operational background, and now it was really time for me to start honing in and figuring out what prescribed fire was about, how to manage fuels on the landscape with large landscape type projects. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then in 2004, I accepted a suppression system fire management position here on the Boise National Forest. And I did that for 10 years. And then I went into, much like Joe, I did some fire planning. And so from 2014 through the end of 2020, I was the Boise National Forest fire planner. So dealing with planning, you deal with budgets, you deal with oversight, module configurations, number of personnel. How much money does the lookouts get, where all this money is going. And so you oversee that program as a whole. So in 2020, I did retire from the Forest Service with about 34 years of time in. And in 2021, the state of Idaho picked me up. And so now I'm currently working for the state of Utah. And so the reason I'm working for the state of Utah is that allows me to go out and be with incident management teams and do some of those types of things, take all my experience and bottle it up and let them take advantage, and I can help with different projects and things along the way. So my current position that I am serving right now is I'm one of the 16 Type 1 incident management team incident commanders in the nation and stuff. And so I have one of the Type 1 teams in the Great Basin. I've been doing the incident commander thing with Type 2 and Type 1 teams for about the last 10 years. And so it's really served a great deal of purpose as a whole, travel all over the country, get to meet amazing people. And again, all my experience with prescribed fire fuels management, suppression, just kind of bottles up, and it's just kind of led me down the road of wanting to be leaders of leaders, and allows me to bring organization to chaos. So that's kind of a little bit of me in a nutshell. And so again, like Joe was saying, boy, I'm an open book. If you got a question, please ask as far as a discussion. And if I can help anybody along the way, with their career path, or, take something that I have available, please feel free to ask. So thank you very much. Look forward to our conversation. And thank you much, Joe, for the invite.
Our pleasure. So I do have a list of questions that I can go down to kind of break the ice and prompt some discussion, but anyone who has a question at any time, either use the little hand raise icon in Zoom, or just turn on your camera and raise your hand, and we'll call on you. Again, we want this to be a discussion, not a one-way lecture. So please feel free to engage and ask your questions. A lot of experience here in Tony, and like we said in the last couple of these, if either of us don't know the answer to your question, I guarantee you we know someone who does, and we can find you some answers. So I'll go ahead and get started. You already kind of talked about what the path you took to get here, but what got you started in wanting to do fire and fuels in the first place?
It's a it's a kind of a funny question. Is how do we get started in life in general when we roll out of high school? I guess it was almost like an accident. I was looking to spend time in the outdoors, and so when I got out of high school, I went to a small junior college in Oregon. I thought I was going to be a track star in cross country and run, and that was how I was going to make my millions. But that quickly changed. And so then I actually went to the University of Idaho, way back when. I think it was maybe the spring of '87 or something like that. And so I started going down the road of, just really enjoying the outdoors. I wanted to go into big game management. And so, I spent some time there on campus. And so then I started to figure out, okay, I need a summer job. My father worked for the Forest Service for 35 years. Visiting with him and getting some counsel and advice, and him knowing my personality and my physical attributes and abilities, he's like, guess what? That you need to just dive in. And I think fighting fire, you will grow and learn a lot. It'll help you develop, things down the road you can't even imagine. So I kind of stumbled into the fire and fuels management side of things. I had no idea other than fighting fire, put the wet stuff on the hot stuff and throw dirt, and things of that nature was the basic concept. As I grew up on a small little farm, ranch, burning ditches and things of that nature. And so, but once I got into the organization on the Boise National Forest on the Idaho City Ranger District, that's kind of was really where I got kicked off and, putting me through fire guard school, being 18, 19 years old, not really knowing anything other than, work hard, put your nose down, listen, learn, and, just be a sponge, collectively learn everything you possibly can and don't be afraid to ask questions. Now, granted, being 18 and 19 years old, you come into a fire organization and it can be really intimidating and depends on one's personality of whether or not you take traction on, you find a mentor, you find somebody that's easy to talk to, you find somebody that's going to take you underneath their wing and, kind of teach you and show you the ropes. It doesn't have to be even during work hours. It can be after hours, and find that one individual that, that can help you along the way, other than you always happen to crack a new nut every time you're wanting to learn something. And so, that was really kind of what kicked me off, starting in fire suppression. And then, as I got going in throughout my years, that's really where I started to understand and what prescribed fire was about. So that first fire season, got to fight a few fires on a small hand crew, worked on the engines. And then as we started to roll into the fall, when it wasn't fire season, then that's where all the thinning and piling and pile burning, that's where I really got my first taste of, a bunch of logging slash, burning small piles, running a drip torch, terror torch, some of those types of things, Joe.
Excellent. Yeah, it's amazing what kind of starts the ball rolling and then kind of where it takes you as your career moves along and you find different things that interest you. And excellent.
Right. And something else that, granted, that was 30 plus years ago. And, the technology nowadays and how you can access things is amazing. How you can research things. Again, dating myself, there was barely cell phones. They were bricks. They were about the size of a car battery, it seemed like. And it's amazing. The computers they had, were, it was very cryptic. And so the technology nowadays for people to get kickstarted and to really understand what life is about as a whole, within a variety of different careers, it's amazing. Because back then, if you wanted to learn, you had to open up a book, you had to take notes, and you had to read. There wasn't a lot of this technology that folks have today, and so it's kind of a blessing and a curse. But again, I think everybody can maybe sometime appreciate some of the old school stuff, and then some of the new age environment or the technology that's available.
Yeah, especially how fast it's advancing right now. I just sat in on a emerging technologies and fire behavior prediction webinar this morning, and some of the stuff coming our way is light years past what we've been using. So it'll be an interesting next decade to see where all that stuff goes.
Yep, you're exactly right.
So what are some of the challenges in the work that you do as an IC and as a burn boss?
So I'm a type 1 burn boss, and so I've got to bounce all over the country doing type 1 burns. Some of the challenges out there as an incident commander or as a type 1 burn boss is that the challenge is you have to educate yourself as best as you possibly can. You have to surround yourself with good, solid individuals that help you complete a project or lead a team. You can't do it all yourself. If you think you can do it yourself, you're sorely mistaken, because again, running an incident management team or pulling off a prescribed fire on a large landscape scale is that, yeah, you might be the point person, you might be that leader, but everybody else underneath of you, that's whether one is a fuel truck driver, the person that's running the drip torch, filling the drip torches, the individuals on the prescribed fire side of things, the individuals that were running the saw, stacking the sticks, all of those individuals are part of your team. You just happen to be the person in charge. And so I think, one of the challenges is that not a lot of recognition goes to the people that really do a lot of the hard work, the planning, the burn plan writing, running the fire behavior, the calculations, making sure that everything falls within the national template that we're all required to follow when we're writing a burn plan. So there's a whole other people behind the scenes that are supporting you. And you just have to be able to facilitate and coordinate and just be part of the team. And so it's not all you. And as an incident commander, some of the challenges are, again, you go to different states, different landscapes, different forests, different agencies, and they all have a little slice of something's just a little different. What's important in central Idaho versus northern Idaho. I've been, back to the boundary waters in Minnesota. There's a different values at risk. There's different things that are important to different people. And so you have to really be a good listener and understand what's important to people and anchor into that, and, not push them by the wayside, but you have to be a good listener and to implement and to be a problem solver. And again, bring an organization to chaos. When you have, 2,000 to 4,000 people, that's part of your incident management team, including firefighters. The blanket goes very far and very wide in the sense what it takes to run an incident. So, that's just kind of really the top of some of the challenges, but there's several other challenges that's all tied to either prescribed fire and running with an incident management team.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, especially like you said, traveling far and wide, digging in and finding those folks with that local knowledge and not dismissing them, but kind of listening to them as well is huge. I can't count how many fires I've been on where I get a division or a task force leader from another region, and you can have a lot of experience in Florida or Missouri, but then you come to the Rockies or Region 3, it's a little different. And the good leaders will ask questions and listen and have that two-way conversation. And some of the others, try to think or act like they know it all, do it by themselves. And that's, you can't do that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's, recognizing you as a person, recognizing your skill set yourself, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because, as soon as you think you know it all, you're going to be sorely mistaken, and it could steer you the wrong way. Nathan, looks like you got your hand up.
All right, let me unmute myself. So Tony, did you do formal schooling in fire ecology during that whole timeline? Did you get set to stuff through the agency, or?
It's a real good question. And so I didn't quite complete my my education. So I got some schooling in the sense of a junior college and the semester there at the University of Idaho. But once I got anchored in and started working with the Forest Service, I started working like 9 or 10 months out of the year. And so, I was 18, 19 years old. I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I mean, I enjoyed skiing, snow skiing. And so I worked 9, 10 months a year, and I went and played the other 2 months, because I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I was just having fun being a young adult. And then as my career went on, I started doing course training, and a lot of it was just schools of hard knocks, and I also too, just anchoring in and finding somebody that I thought was a good mentor and that they had a knowledge base. And I started anchoring into them. I started asking them questions. And it was simply going to dinner, having a beer, some of those types of things, and just not being afraid to engage with older individuals that have been in the system, and just asking, very youthful type questions, as silly as it sounds. I look back now on some of the questions that I did ask, and I was like, I can't believe that even fell out of my mouth, that I didn't have the whereabouts or the knowledge that, why was I asking such a premature or just a very not anchored or thought out question? But again, you don't know what you don't know. And that's another thing that's real important, as us as just leaders or people that want to do this job, is that you got to have a source, you got to have a humility, knowing that, you're going to be embarrassed from time to time, but have some humility and give that grace to folks, that you're talking to or help teaching along the way. Did I answer your question? And then throughout my career, I did some advanced courses, the technical fire management course that was put on several years ago. And those are 400 and 500 level type courses that are related to system statistics and some biology and some of those types of things. But a lot of it was just traveling and just being in the moment and just experiencing it firsthand. And not looking, and taking opportunities no matter where there was.
Yeah, no, you mostly answered my question.
Okay.
Part of it was just trying to understand, because you said, I'm not sure about like the fire planner job and what series it is and like what it requires to get there. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how that job plays out.
Yeah, so the fire
In the
planner
grand
job,
scheme of things.
the fire planner job depends on what agency you're from. Some of them was 401 series, so I think the BLM is a 401 series, which requires, I can't remember the number of credits it requires nowadays, but it requires credits. Now, fire planner for the Forest Service, I believe it's a 301 series, and they don't necessarily require any formal education. And so I was very, very fortunate just through the school of hard knocks and determination and not missing an opportunity. There was times where I was smoke jumping, and on the shoulders of the season, I was gone a lot doing prescribed fire in New Mexico and Arizona. Wherever there was, going to Texas, wherever there was an opportunity, I jumped at it because I wanted to learn. I wanted to see what those different programs were about. I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to be a program manager of some sort, but I didn't know exactly what. And so therefore, again, coming back full circle on the fire planner side of things, understanding how budgets work, understanding how the finance side of things work, different agencies do different things. And so if you're interested in the fire planning side of stuff, if you're working with the Forest Service, anchor into somebody that does the fire planner stuff and sit down and talk with them and figure out what works for them to be a fire planner, because every forest is different. Every planner job could be different, whether you could be a planner on the NEPA side of things, or you could be a planner on the finance side of things, and so it kind of all depends on how you want to slice that hair to figure out what avenue you want to follow, what interests you.
Go ahead, Nicole.
So this kind of rolls into my question is, at what point did you realize you were interested in a managerial or planner type of a position?
Nicole, that's a real good question. Again, so throughout my career, I never really had a plan up until about the last 10 years. And so I kind of just clumsily stumbled around a little bit and just looked for that next promotion and figuring out, I didn't want to be too far from home, which, it can be a double-edged sword. If you're willing to travel and you're willing to go to different places, opportunities are definitely more available for different career job opportunities within the fire and fuels world, prevention, just fire program management as a whole. But I stayed pretty close to home. I stayed within one forest, actually. And so I was pretty fortunate that I was able to do that, just because family is, again, pretty important to me. And so just anchoring in and not being too far away. But again, where I live, I got to do everything I enjoy doing. Now, as I kind of went out through my career, I liked just working hard and being a problem solver. And so I started, being an incident commander type 5. I was like, yeah, I like leading people. I like working with helicopters. It's exciting. And type 4, type 3, you get to work with a bigger organization, and you have to think about logistics. You have to think about, how do I support the firefighters that are working for me? And so it was more of the challenge of how to create harmony out of chaos, or deal with natural resources, because I hold a value of protecting our natural resources for not only the present but for future. But also too, it comes with a lot of different things with that. Now, the last 10 years, as I've been an incident commander, leading a variety or a diverse group of people that's got a ton of skill and a ton of different personalities. And so with an incident management team, I typically run with about 60 to 80 different people on my team as a whole, between finance, communications, logistics, planning, operations, a human resource specialist. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so within, those 60, 80 people, those are the people that help support all the firefighters out on the ground, whether division group supervisor spiked out, people have got to have food, people have got to have water, people have got to have radio or batteries for their radios, they got to have hose, they got to have equipment. And so being part of that process and helping the firefighters do the hard work itself has kind of led me to the point where I'm at. That's some of the challenges and what I anchor into, what I enjoy doing over the last 10 years. I know that was kind of a shotgun approach. Did I answer your question?
I feel like you answered it for me. I'm kind of at a point where I'm a fighter fire type 1 trainee. I have FEMA. I do a lot of prescribed fire, but I'm getting to a point where I need to move out of like a field crew leader position, trying to figure out that next point. So that's why I was kind of interested in your response, because I'm wondering if I would like to be a natural resource manager as well as a firefighter. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of trying. I guess I need to figure out my anchor points. You sound like my fire boss who told me this the other day, so.
Right. You bring up a really, really good point, and if I had to go back and give myself some advice, when I was in my early career, I would tell myself, be thinking 2 to 4 years out in front of yourself, even 5 years out, so that way you actually have a roadmap to follow. It's as silly as it sounds. I mean, how to get to your local supermarket, right? But again, there's a roadmap, there's a path that you have to follow. You have to take a left, you have to take a right, you have to stop at a stoplight, and you have to look for traffic. It's kind of a goofy analogy, but again, as long as you're thinking ahead of yourself, it best positions yourself down the road. Other than when you're driving to the supermarket, you don't drive right off the hood of your car, right? You look out in front of yourself, for oncoming traffic and pedestrians and bicyclists. So you're looking out ahead of yourself of what obstacles you need to navigate around. And so if you can do that with your career with, 2 to 4 years, 5 years down the road, it's better going to suit yourself figuring out how to follow the most streamlined path with less hurdles. Because if you drive off the front of your car, you drive off that nose, which I did for several years. I just took it as it came. guess what? You're not going to get anywhere very fast because, again, more hard knocks and more things you have to learn other than picking your head up and looking around and looking down the road, really allows you to see where you want to go and what you want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Okay, great. Good question, Nicole.
I think Tony mentioned something about this earlier, but if you're interested in potentially pursuing that role, maybe go find somebody in that role and have a chat with them and see what they like about their job and what the challenges are. A lot of the questions that we're asking now, and then ask about what that pathway to get there would look like. And that can help guide your decisions a little bit. I think you're taking a great step coming to a course like this and exploring all the different pathways. So, little plug here for the class itself, but there's some great discussions to be having. I wish there was something like this when I first started out. I was driving off the hood myself for a long time before I figured out where I needed to be. So,
right, it's just a natural. It's a natural place to be. Is walking right off the toes. And not looking far enough ahead. And so if I can give any advice to anybody, I mean, not only just on a personal level, but just career level, is look out ahead. And figure out what that looks like, and figure out if that's something you want to take a bite of and pursue, or either that or pitch it to the side and don't even look back.
So next question on my list is, what knowledge, skills you think would be most helpful for this new generation coming into the field to help them be successful and happy working in fire and or fuels?
Okay, yeah, that's a real good question in the sense that I'm going to try to look through the eyes of my kids. My kids are 19 and 21. My daughter's going to school to be a nurse, and my son, he's just plowing through life, and and so I learn a lot from them, as well as collectively as a whole. Every time that I do something like this, I always learn something, and so I would say I got a couple of things I just kind of jotted down here. I would say that it's kind of the skills and attitude are kind of they can intermingle quite easily. And so I'll start off with the first one that comes to mind, and that's soft people skills. I call it soft people skills. It's a leadership. And so if you have soft people skills, that means that you're not quick to judge, that you listen and you ask questions. And figuring out exactly who somebody is and what do you want to get out of them, or what answers do you need from them, other than just being forceful and just being rude. I think we can all appreciate and understand that, whatever stones you're going to be casting at someone's glass house is not going to serve you well. And so I think, just being kind and just being a good human being, I think is a good start. Treating people, talking to people, I have given that respect is also very, very huge. Now, granted, you just don't give respect. You have to earn respect, but if you give respect to somebody, they're going to respect you in the same context of not only maybe on a professional level, but also to a personal level and stuff, and so being professional and personable is also too a really good trait to have. Being able to ask questions, we talked about that, and being humble, being courteous. All these little things of just being a good human will take you so far in life, down a great career path that, as a supervisor or as an employer, you want somebody that's going to be representing you, other than, you're going to be carrying that flag, for them because you're going to be representing them. And so, but if you're not going to be able to represent not only yourself, but your supervisor or an agency, I think you need to really look within yourself and figure out, am I being the best person I possibly can? Let's see, a couple other ones I have here is, we talked about don't be afraid to ask, other folks for advice. And I'll use the analogy of, if you have a conversation with your grandparents or your parents, I'm sure that they're full of advice and they're more than happy to share stories with you. Again, I mean, that's what it's all about is kind of that, a little bit of that analogy that, if you ask the questions, people are going to be more than happy to share their experience, one, to steer you away from that pitfall, or how to get through life until you really get anchored in and you really get up and get going in life. And then, family will come around and this and that, and then you'll start figuring things out on your own. A couple of the other ones I have here is always be a student of fire. Always be willing to learn. And what I mean by a student of fire is that me, even though I've got almost 34, 35 years of experience on the suppression side of things, running an incident management team, prescribed fire, is that there's always something to learn. So don't always don't take it for granted that you know everything. Things, as you get older with more experience, things become intuitive, they become easier. But again, boy, don't miss an opportunity to learn from, things that you do, and also to learn from other people. Every time I go with an incident management team, every time I go with a group of folks, I will pull a first or a second year individual, and I'll just start up a conversation. I won't tell them who I am or anything of that nature, and just ask them who they are, where they're from, what do you like about what they're doing, and really just get a different perspective of, what makes younger individuals want to do this kind of job, today in today's environment, because it is so socially and politically charged that, it's a fine line of, some people think you're doing wonderful. You're a hero 1 minute, and the next minute you're a zero. People love to hate you and hate to love you, from time to time. And so it's really kind of one of those things. And really anchoring in also to the community, fire communities, kind of a theme. You got your duty, you got your respect, and you got your integrity. If you anchor into those three things, boy, you got a really good foundation to build upon. I have here, just understanding computer programs nowadays. Back when I started, probably for the first 15 years, everything was done longhand. You had to figure out equations. You had to figure out fire rates and spread, rise over run. All these things very longhand, with slide charts and flow graphs. And nowadays, boy, there is so many different types of programs out there that makes it so much easier than what it was. I guess I'll call it old school. But, understanding how to do those types of things, being familiar with the mapping, being familiar with GIS type of programs, fuels and fire modeling, understanding weather. If you understand weather and become kind of a junior meteorologist, as I call them, boy, you understand a lot, and you can help yourself in programs and understanding fire effects and all those different things of when you actually either putting fires out or, actually putting fire on the landscape. I'll just kind of take a pause there, but there's so much more that you can anchor into as far as, some of the skills and attitudes and, things that will carry you, far, far down the road, not only within your career, but also too personally.
Oh, that's an excellent list. I agree with everything you said there. I'll even emphasize the understanding fire behavior and the effects. A lot of times people just focus in on the fire itself, but especially if we're looking at prescribed fire and landscape ecology, the effects that the fire is having as well is sometimes even more important to understand and a lot less understood. So
right. Yeah. The other thing too, Joe, with prescribed fire is you have to have patience. You have to have patience and understanding that you just can't throw a bunch of fire on the ground and expect to get results immediately. You might have to have 1, 2, or 3 different entries of fire in order to get the fire effects, to reach some objectives that you're looking for. You have your first order, second order fire effects, to where you might put fire on the ground, and then next, 2 years later, 3 years later, guess what? Some trees are dying. Well, why are they dying? Everybody's like, okay, it's got to be bugs. It's got to be bugs. But well, guess what? That's the second and third order fire effects. It's just that residual that, you burned. Okay. You tapped into some roots, you heat scorched some trees. And so now the trees they're dying. Now they're dead, but it's taken a couple of years for that to happen. Just as another example of, having patience and understanding fire effects. Did I see a question pop up here in the chat? Maybe Joe?
Yeah, so it says, just wondering if you could compare and contrast how your role as a manager changes with RX fire versus suppression.
Yeah, ask that question again.
So basically, I think it's asking to compare your role as a leader, as a incident commander versus a fire or a burn boss in those two different roles, suppression versus prescribed.
Right. Okay. It goes hand in hand. So my experience as a type 1 burn boss and all the burning I've done over the years plays really, it plays right in hand with being an incident commander. So it's real easy. If the fire's coming down off the mountain, for example, and you have either a lake or you got a road or you got some natural barriers at the bottom of the hill, the natural reaction is like, well, let's just go burn it off the road. Instead of hiking people up and putting underslung line in or whatever, let's just go and let's just burn it off the road. Well, okay, that's easy. Sometimes pushing the easy button is not the right button to be pushing. So with my experience doing RX burn and understanding fire effects is that I try to explain to the agency administrators and explain to the operations folks that, guess what, we want to fight fire on our terms. And what that means is sometimes you have to have patience. Sometimes you have to wait for the fire to come to you. You have to pick the right ridge at the right time with the right resources in order to implement, certain actions. And so if we're going to be putting fire on the landscape, if we're going to be burning off of a road, or if we're going to be needing to bring fire down a drainage or something like that, I highly encourage my operations folks is to use the principles of prescribed fire, is that we don't want it all nuked. That's the easy button. We want to maintain a stand integrity, because again, it's the environment, it's the ecosystems, it's the habitat that everything that uses it. Yeah, the easy button is, yeah, let's slick it off. Let's just move on. That's not being instant. That's not managing an incident. That's just, I don't want to say that's being reckless. I mean, sometimes you have to do that because you're in this time wedge. But if you have the time and the ability to treat wildfire suppression actions and use prescribed fire tools and techniques, that's what managing an incident is really all about, is understanding and figuring out how you lead people and make them understand that you don't want it moonscaped. You don't want it black. You still want the treetops. You still want the crown, and treat it like a prescribed fire. And so it serves so many purposes. If that answers your question, I kind of all over the board again.
No, I think that was great. Yeah, they are kind of hand in hand, even though they seem like they're on opposite ends of the poles. Really, the goals should be the same, and that's to maintain the landscape and to take care of the lands. And sometimes in suppression, we can do as much, if not more, harm if we're not careful and not mindful of the effects of what we're doing, not just what the fire's doing.
Absolutely.
Like you said, it depends on the time wedge and our options, but when we have the options, I think it's really important for us to try and have that light hand on the land and make sure that we're making the right calls ecologically.
Right. Yep. I see Nicole kind of nodding her head, I think she's agreeing.
It's funny in a way to hear a lot of this. So we, on the military base, we're looking to build a machine gun range. And we're on Cape Cod. It's a tourist place. People aren't very happy about it. But one of the things they're concerned about is this threat of a wildfire. And it's funny because we try so hard on the base to do our burn program so that we're creating like a mosaic pattern for all the box turtles, the moths, all these other things. And it's that's why I'm like shaking my head so much, is hearing you talk so much about the ecology, natural resources as a incident commander and burn boss just is nice to hear as somebody who's not a straight wildland firefighter operational background. I'm the natural resources and a prescribed firefighter. So.
Right. And I think, Nicole, also too, a big part of making a fire program successful, or even an incident, a wildfire incident, is the messaging. Yeah.
Yeah.
using the public information officers, using the prevention programs, and getting the word out, and help educating people, is generally, sometimes that is the firefight itself. And so again, we can't forget about those folks that are doing, that legwork, because it's very, very important, just from that perspective.
Yeah. We as a program, we're basically rebuilding from the last few years. We actually hired the contractor who's done most of our burns as now our wildland fire program and prescribed fire program coordinator. And we're working with a lot of people. And like today we did a small 20-acre burn, but tomorrow we're assisting the state wildlife agency for a 210-acre burn right on a reservoir. So that'll be, I bet there's people coming out people were complaining about our smoke today, which was nothing compared to tomorrow. So
right. Yeah. Everybody wants to watch.
Oh yeah.
And everybody thinks they're an expert.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Feel like we've already kind of gone through some of this, Tony. Do you have any recommendations or advice for folks that want to be successful and find a good career? It says with your agency, and you work with several, so just in general, in your experience, what are some key pieces of advice for finding a good career path in fuels and fire?
Yeah, a good career path is, again, looking out in front of you and figuring out what your niche is. Sometimes it's about fire ecology. Sometimes it's about fuels management. Sometimes it's about suppression. Sometimes it's about the NEPA planning. So there's a lot of different things out there that you can reach out and touch, but when it really boils down to it, they all intertwine with one another. Nicole, you mentioned about going, what maybe your next career is, or your next path is becoming a natural resource manager, like an area manager or something of that nature, and if you have, there's nothing wrong. I think it's almost a necessity nowadays that if you want to become a district ranger or for a supervisor or some sort of staff, that deals with natural resources, is that it's a very, very good idea to have a fire background, or at least have a little bit of understanding, because I don't want to say not the notoriety, but just the recognition and just how fire can impact different programs as a whole, sometimes is not clearly understood. Because as we all know, when fire season takes hold, billions of dollars are spent, and so where does that money that money's got to come from somewhere. And so, it wasn't so far long ago, that the budget people, were stealing, or not stealing, but borrowing other funds from other programs, in order to pay the fire debt, and so again, it's a bad shake for the natural resource or the recreation folks, that want to put in a bridge or build a trail or do some sort of wildlife habitat. They can't do those projects because fire comes along and they have to pay that bill. Now, some things have changed over the last couple of years, which it doesn't necessarily impact some of those programs. But again, if you really think about, what is the one thing that is the most damaging to the landscape, whether if it's ecosystems or whether if it's investments with trails, bridges, roads, erosion and things like that. And it's generally fire. Outside of fire and hurricanes, those are just destructive things that happen to the landscape from a natural resource perspective. And so I think that you can touch many, many different things, as you look forward in a career. Now, what's really important is that, the networking, the friendships that you make, not only with the education side of things, but within each of your work environments, your agencies, the networking, it lasts you a career. I mean, it lasts you a lifetime, not only career-based, but also friends. You will make lifelong friends in the fire and fuels world, because it's a very small world. Even though that we got 30,000 firefighters collectively, on a national scale, roughly 30,000. Again, The community is very, very small. I mean, I've been down to Belize, I've been down to the Caribbean, just minding my own business, and you'll hear somebody talk about fire. And, if you're in the business long enough and, people will start recognizing your name and you're going to go, oh, you're that person, or you've done this. Your name will anchor in. And so again, it comes back to your reputation and what you've done. But again, it's a real small community. So networking is huge. It's served me well. Having good references, not only for your job, but just you as a person, giving you just a good recommendation of that, you're a good person and that you got good core values and that, you will serve and represent your supervisor or your agency, with pride. Some of the other things I think that to anchor into to be real successful too is keep all your options open. Kind of dabble a little bit here and there, get to know a little bit about something and then move on, because that builds your foundation to later on in life when you really anchor into truly where your career is going to go and what kind of a difference are you going to make, with your opportunities and your career, whether if it's prescribed fire, budget work, or, what exactly do you want to do in life? That's really keeping your options open. Now, sometimes, again, like I mentioned very, very early on, that I was very, very fortunate. I didn't have to travel very far. I got to pretty much stay within the same national forest. I stayed within an hour and a half of where I grew up, in Southwest Idaho, out of Boise. And so again, I was very, very fortunate, but again, I was very strategic in how I played my cards. Once I got and understood how to navigate, different job opportunities, I was always looking ahead, 2 to 4 years and figure out, okay, I want that job and that individual is going to move on, or that individual is going to retire. And so how do I build my skill set and how do I network? How do I talk to that supervisor? Whether if it's the district ranger, the forest supervisor, and start greasing those skids way early on, other than waiting for a job to fly or waiting for a job to open. And then you just kind of cold call, you just drop your application in, and the supervisor, they don't know anything about you other than what you write on paper. Now, granted, you could have the most stellar application in the world, but again, people like to know and put a picture with a face, or put a face with a name. That's what I meant to say. And again, I mean, it's just all those things, looking down the road and just being prepared and, just don't miss an opportunity, wherever that might lie. I'll kind of leave it at that. See if there's any questions or comments.
Absolutely. I'll second the networking portion of it. I actually keep a book, and every time I go on an assignment or a burn or a class, I'll write down the names of people I met and their contact info, that I can keep that, and I'll reach out to people years later or see them again on another fire and kind of rekindle that relationship. And it truly is a very small world.
Right. I mean, some of the networking that I just established this summer is that, I might be able to go down and do some prescribed fire down around Cape Canaveral, as a type 1 burn boss, going down there and helping with some of that and doing some mentoring and doing some training with some other folks. And so, I'll go to Florida from Idaho. I mean, we got snow right now. I mean, I'd go to Florida in a heartbeat, But again, it's that networking and its skill set and looking for those opportunities to still be of service.
Absolutely. And one thing I will mention is you keyed in on, if you're going for that land manager, district ranger type role, having that strong background in fire is a big plus. I would say, even if you want to stay in fire, trying to have a little bit of a background in that ecology and the ologist side of things, that understanding would benefit you as well. I didn't realize how little I knew about that side of fire until I took a fire ecology course, and all of a sudden, it was a whole new world for me. So definitely something to look into, even if you want to stay strictly on the fire side, getting to know some of those other ends of the science, getting into weather, some of those other things, real key in rounding yourself out.
Yeah, making yourself well-rounded. That's one thing about fire, is it's not forgiving. Once you put fire on the ground, you can't take it back. And so that's why you want to be very, very I call it, you need to be surgical when you're dealing with prescribed fire, at a landscape scale, maybe not so much dealing with piles, but you have to be surgical. You have to be very methodical. How much smoke pollution, or I shouldn't say smoke pollution, but how much smoke emissions are you going to be generating? And sometimes I've been on projects where I could only light 5 piles because of the smoke index was very poor. There's been other times where I've been able just to light the world on fire and had great index and, no problem at all with smoke. Smoke is going to become your worst enemy when it comes to prescribed fire because of the timing of year, low-lying, cold areas, small communities, large communities. You're going to be producing emissions, and it's got to go somewhere. And so, again, be forethought, be thinking ahead, be surgical on that timing. You might have a perfect burn window, but again, ask yourself, once you put the fire down on the ground, where is all this smoke going to go? And have a further conversation, because the line officer, the district ranger, forest supervisor, the area manager, they need to understand that, guess what? Phone calls are going to start coming in, and are they willing to take that risk? And so it's called sharing the risk, because you may be the implementer. Other folks may have been the planner or one of the same, but somebody has ultimately have to take responsibility of your actions. And so that's why it's real important to communicate that to your leadership, or you have an understanding when you become the leader of what folks are going to be doing on the ground, as you are supervising them.
Absolutely. Any other questions for Tony?
I see a couple other things in the chat here. I think we got it covered, though, it looks like.
Yeah, I think everything from the chat we've taken care of.
Yeah.
Nicole, did you have something else?
Yeah. So I'm fairly new to being like a field crew leader in a leadership position. We just took the followership to leadership class last week. So I figured I'd ask if you and Joe, if you guys have any advice, not just for like me, but everyone in the group, if we're getting into leadership roles, some advice for very early on trying to mold ourselves into better leaders in the fire world.
I would say don't get ahead of yourself. Everybody, don't, when you become a single resource boss, so you become a squad leader, then you become a crew boss, and then a single resource, you become an engine boss or a strike team task force leader. Sometimes where I've seen people absolutely fail at leadership is they want to become a leader too fast, where they don't have the skill set. They don't have the slides. They don't have the slides to understand what it takes to be a leader at those various levels. I mean, I've seen people that they become a single resource boss, whether they supervise an engine or a hand crew. And then next thing they want to be a division group supervisor. And so their supervisor says, well, yeah, there's an open slot, that will throw you into a class. And there couldn't be anything more risky, but also to set that individual up for failure, because they don't have the slides there. They don't have the understanding of what it truly becomes and truly what a division group supervisor does, that's above that leadership and that supervision level. Span of control is huge, from a single resource boss to a division group supervisor. Division group supervisor, you're dealing with all sorts of aircraft. You're dealing with incident management team. You're dealing with air attack. You're dealing with air tankers. You're dealing with all this stuff that is just swirling around like a bee's nest, where maybe not so much so at the single resource boss level. I mean, you're just not you're just dealing with, but you got 4 or 5 people that you're supervising. You got one task for the day. You got to put out some stump holes, or you got to do some direct line, or you got to do some hot spotting, or you might be doing some mobile attack and stuff, and so the span of control or the taskings may not be as complicated, and so don't be in too big of a hurry. Learn the ropes and become a good leader as you go through your career. And don't try to fast track yourself, because one, you're going to fail yourself and you're going to put other people in harm's way, just because you don't have the skill set, or you don't have the awareness of what the implications are, down the road in a bigger picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Absolutely. And I'll add a couple other thoughts to that. One, be very observant of the leaders around you now that you're getting in that position. Learn from every one of them. Learn the good from the good leaders. Try to emulate the best leaders that you had, what they do, how they do things, but also learn from the bad leaders. Learn what not to do and be self-aware enough to recognize when you're taking on some of those traits. The things I learned from great leaders is they would never ask me to do something that they wouldn't do themselves. And I try to emulate that. And they'd always be very personable. The number one job of a leader is to give the people under them the tools they need to be successful. And so, listening to what they have, being able to clearly communicate to them what you need done, and then trusting them to do what you need them to do. You give trust into people and they'll go to war for you. It's kind of amazing and fun. That's my favorite part about being a leader, is just being basically a servant to those people. I give them what they need. I tell them what they need to do and communicate things well to them, give them the tools they need, and then let them go out and be successful. One of the other things is just, read books, listen to podcasts. There's a ton of great information out there on how to be a good leader. One book that I'm rereading that I've read several times is Extreme Ownership, written by a couple Navy SEALs. It's about their experiences in the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, but they boiled down these leadership lessons to something that everyone can understand. And I think that's a really great one. There's a couple Wildland Fire books that you probably had in your class. Great class. I love that one, by the way. And just never stop learning and observing. The old adage, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should be listening twice as much as you talk. And then stay humble, like Tony said. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. A handshake and a smile will go a lot farther than yelling and screaming and trying to get your way. So again, those are all kind of rambling a little bit too, but all advice that I've gotten from leaders that I figured were pretty good and things I try to emulate.
Right. Yep. That's real good advice, Joe. And again, I mean, all the leaders that I've done, I've taken the good with the bad. You got to kind of sift it and sort it out and figure out what falls into your style. And again, even though I'm the incident commander of a team, I clearly communicate that I work for them. They don't work for me. We work together as a team. We build synergy. We build, that cohesion. And ultimately, I work for the team. I try to give them the tools, and I try to be that buffer. When you have a congressman or you have a governor that is just irate and they want to come down and just jump down the throats of anybody that's on the incident management team, that's my job, is to stand in the way and be that buffer and be that shield so they can do the work.